Okay, welcome everyone. We are really fortunate today for our virtual living library to have a guest speaker, Carrie Newman. Carrie is a multidisciplinary artist, master carver, filmmaker, author, public speaker. In his artistic practice, he strives to highlight Indigenous social environmental issues as he examines the impacts of colonialism and capitalism. In his efforts to drive positive change, he's also interested in engaging with communities and incorporating innovative methods derived from the traditional teachings and Indigenous worldviews in his process. So we are really excited to have Carrie join us today. For those of you that are aware of this, Carrie is the artist behind the witness blanket, which is actually, there's a replica in the Kelowna Museum right now. So we are going to turn the mic over to Carrie and let him get started with his presentation. Thanks, Carrie.
Thank you, Tobias. Good morning, everybody. My name is Carrie Newman. My traditional name is Hayalth Kimgume. I come from the Kwekwekum, Giksam, and Wallaby clans of the Kwakwaka'wakw Nation, which is on the north end of the island I'm on now, which is Vancouver Island. That's through my dad's dad. Through his mom, I come from Chiam of the Stolo Nation, which is along the Upper Fraser Valley near Chilliwack. And through my mom, I'm English, Irish, and Scottish, settler from Saskatchewan. As Tobias mentioned, I'm the artist behind the witness blanket that's at the Kelowna Art Gallery at the moment, or the replica is at the art gallery. And I'm planning to share a little bit about how I made that artwork and what it's about. See how well this works this morning. Now, I'm hoping that everybody can see the screen that I have right now. I'm just going to talk a teeny little bit about what's important to me as an artist. One of the things that I think is really important is how I do the things I do and why. This word, awit nakiola, is a Kwakwala word, and it means to live in respectful relationship with the land, air, water, spirit worlds, and everything in them. And it's something that I think about quite a bit when I'm doing my artwork. What that means is that I try to live in balance with nature, with people, with technology, with economy. And I try to make sure that when I'm making artwork, I keep these things in mind. Another thing that is really important is this teaching called respecting the past, honoring the present, and taking responsibility for the future. And it's another thing that I think a lot about, because the people who came before me, my ancestors, that's who I work to make sure that I am respecting in the work that I do today. By honoring the present, I'm thinking about people like you, people all around us, my parents, my daughter, the people who are alive today, and making sure that the work that I make is somehow benefiting the present. And then what I mean by taking responsibility for the future is I try to make sure that the things that I make provide space for the future. They think about children who haven't been born yet, future generations, and make sure that I don't take too many things now so that there's not enough of those things for people in the future. The last thing that I think about quite a bit in my artistic practice is my purpose. Why do I do the things that I do? One of them in particular with this project, the witness blanket, is to share truth. Canada is a pretty great country, but there's a lot of things that it's done in its past and that it continues to do in the present that have been pretty difficult for Indigenous people. So I try to share the truth of that in this project. Another thing I try to do is protect the land. In my culture, we we believe that we are equal with the land and that we should never take more from it than we need. So I carve totems for part of my career, and I try to make sure that I don't take more trees than I need to carve the totems that I carve. And lastly, I have a purpose of uplifting community. And for me, that community starts with my Indigenous community, but it extends to everybody in this country and beyond. I am, as I mentioned in the beginning, I'm of mixed heritage. I'm Indigenous and a settler. And so I think about both of those things when I'm making my artwork. Now, I'm going to show a short video that describes how the witness blanket began.
Between 1870 and 1996, more than 150,000 Indigenous children were taken from their families and sent to residential schools. Their identities were stolen, cultures extinguished. They were undernourished, neglected, and often abused. There were more than 4,100 confirmed deaths. Did your school have a graveyard? How could this have happened? Where do we go from here? The Witness Blanket, a national monument to recognize the atrocities of the Indian residential school era.
Yeah.
Can I blow this?
Strewn in the wake of the Indian residential schools are an immeasurable number of broken or damaged pieces. These fragmented cultures, crumbling buildings, segments of language, and grains of diminished pride are often connected only by the common experience that created them. Imagine those pieces, symbolic and tangible, woven together in the form of a blanket. A blanket made from pieces of residential schools, churches, government buildings, and cultural structures. A blanket where the story of each piece is as important to its construction as the wood and screws that hold it together. A blanket with the sole purpose of standing in eternal witness to the effects of the Indian residential school era. The system created and run by churches and the Canadian government to take the Indian out of the child. Left alone, these pieces may be forgotten, lost, buried, or worse, be uncomfortable reminders that leave painful impressions on the minds and hearts of those who recognize what they represent. Individually, they are paragraphs of a disappearing narrative. Together, they are strong and formidable, collectively able to recount for future generations the true story of loss, strength, reconciliation, and pride.
The Witness Blanket may be the most important piece that I ever create, and I feel an obligation to bring it to as many communities as possible. We need to honor the survivors and remember the children who were lost. We need to speak openly about these stories to ensure that this never happens again.
So that gives you a little bit of an idea of how the witness blanket started. The witness blanket is made up from pieces that we gathered from residential school sites across the country. We also included in it pieces from government buildings and pieces from churches. And lastly, I thought that to show the resilience of Indigenous cultures, that we should have things that show how the culture exists today. And so we have pieces from sweat lodges and longhouses and totem carving projects and all sorts of things that are based around Indigenous culture. This is an image of the completed witness blanket where it stands at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights in Winnipeg. And each of the pieces on this blanket, they were, if you look closely, they're pretty normal things. There are things like hockey skates and piano keys. There are things like braids of hair and bricks and doorknobs. And so each individual piece might not seem like much, but because of where they came from and because of the stories and the history that each of them hold, as I started to build them all into what you see before you now, I started to see how collectively they were much more powerful and much more important than they were on their own. And to give you an idea of some of the stories that are held inside of the pieces, or what these pieces represent, I'm going to show a couple of videos from residential school survivors talking about their experience in residential school. The first one that I'm about to show talks about what the first day of school was like.
My first day was the saddest day of my life. Mom and Dad weren't there. I couldn't talk to my brother, I couldn't talk to my sisters, and I wasn't the only one crying, and there's lots of kids crying wanting to go home, not tomorrow or next week, but right now. You know, I shouldn't have come here in the first place. But you know, as a child though, when you hear about residential school, you're growing up. Oh, I want to go, I want to go. You don't know until you get there, your mom and dad are there to tuck you in at night, and you miss that bonding. And then it gets very, very lonely. For about 3 years, after 2 or 3 years, did you start to get used to being in a residential school?
When I first came, I was 5 years old. And we got up to the steps, and the principal told my dad there, don't come to visit because it will disrupt the program. So he never came, so I never knew my dad. But the first thing that happened there was when you're a little guy, or even for an adult going into a new situation there, I was looking around there and I was in awe of how huge this building was. And I was talking my language to Art, and that's the first experience I had where I got slapped in the head really hard. You're not talking that kind of stuff here. But I looked at the guy there and I wanted to know why he did that. And the thing was, don't you look at me like that and hit me again. So you hang your head.
My brothers, they'd run away from the school. You know, just they disappear. Because at night, as soon as they'd get those bed sheets and scale and they'd run away.
Out the window with bed sheets?
Yeah. They'd show up at they'd show up, and then, you know, they'd like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and then, oh, he'd be so glad to see it. We just start playing. My dad said, hey, what's all this commotion? And he'd see my brother said, oh, then he didn't say nothing. He just let us play, and 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, and they'd be tired, and then my dad would just know that the union agent and those guys, police would be here later on in the day to bring him back.
When we got into a truck and then took us to the boarding school, my cousin told me, can't talk. And I was wondering why. And like all the girls that were my age already spoke English, and I didn't speak English. And my cousin told me, you can't speak Cree here. And I was wondering why. So we went downstairs right away to eat. And then the evening, that's when I found out that this wasn't going to be a safe place. This was going to be, I have to watch myself. I have to, because I've seen kids first day, they took our clothes. There was a big pail, a plastic pail, and we had to throw all our clothes in there. And my new dress, I'd throw in there, and then we all naked. We had to go inside and take our shower, and they were with a scrubbing brush, and I was really dark from the summer. I'm already dark, and he was scrubbing. I was yelling, and my cousin kept telling me, "Don't speak Cree, don't speak Cree, don't speak Cree." So then I saw a lot of things now that what's going to happen. A little girl got beaten up with a wet towel, and she didn't want to take her shower, and she got beaten up. And I knew I had to do what everybody was, because I didn't know what was happening. And that's the first time too I saw the little girl run on to the toilet, and somebody else had to go underneath, unlock the door, and they flushed her face in 4 times like that. And my cousin told me, if you talk Cree, that's what's gonna happen to you. And I got scared. And a lot of times my throat was so sore, wanting to say something. You know, when you want to talk, you can't say anything. It was always like that. So, and I knew how to, like, not talk, not feel.
When you think about it, the whole school was set up to take away your culture. And for a lot of our people, they ended up in the graveyard because they couldn't differentiate between our culture and what we were trying to be taught there. So,
Whenever I watch that video, I think a little bit about my own connection to residential schools, because my dad is a residential school survivor. And when I started making the witness blanket, I always kind of thought that as what's called an intergenerational survivor, that I hadn't really been hurt by residential schools. But there's that woman who talks about how she wasn't allowed to speak Cree. And the same thing happened at schools all across the country. And my father was also not allowed to speak Kwakwala. And so at a stop along the tour, I mentioned to an elder that I felt like I was pretty lucky. And he said, well, all Indigenous people have been harmed by residential schools. And when I said, well, how can that be? He said, well, he asked me, do you speak your language? And I thought about it for a minute, and I realized that I don't speak Kwakwala. And as I've slowly started to learn a little bit about the language, I understand more and more what I'm missing, because our language comes from the same place as our artwork. It comes from the same place as our traditions. And it describes them in a different way than English words do. And so because of that, I still have to keep learning my Kwakwala language before I can fully understand my cultural traditions. And the same woman was talking about how it can be really hard to speak when you're afraid of something. And sometimes when I talk about these things, I feel the words get caught in my throat, because I know, because I'm afraid, and I don't know how to express it exactly. Anyways, that's the experience of a few people talking about their first day of school. This next video is going to be about hunger and about food.
Some kids had very little to eat And then the food that they ate you was exactly what it was slop. So we used to have porridge that had maggots in there. They used to feed us bread that was moldy, and when they buttered it, it was just only in the middle. But they put peanut butter on there, it was only in the middle, and then by the time you got to have it for lunch at the high school or wherever you're eating your lunch, the bread was all curled up and everything, really old bread. We used to have to eat it. Same with the dessert, apples, oranges, bananas was rotten. Mostly on the boys' side, they used to steal bread and candy and jam, they just because it was necessary to steal to eat.
It was divided here. All the girls sat on this side, and the boys sat on this side here. And some of the girls that worked in the kitchen, because they knew that you weren't eating properly, and some of them, with the type of tables we had, they put 3 or 4 slices of bread under the table and put a knife there to hold it, so that when you're during your meal, you could reach under the table to get extra bread. And so it taught you many things, bad things. It taught you how to lie, how to steal. Because I know one of the things is because we grew turnips and that, and it was fairly accessible past the woodshed there. We used to eat turnips. All the people nowadays that say that you have to wash everything, you got to be clean. To me, they're full of baloney, because all you did with the turnips was you just wiped it down and you ate it.
Yeah.
Dirt and all. So, but it was either eat it right there, and if you took time to wash it, you got caught. So,
Yeah.
so you were punished.
Get so hungry, you're going to sneak in the kitchen and steal a slice of bread. You got caught, and you would just look at her right in the face and say, "No, I never stole anything." But they'd find it, and then you got punished, you got strapped.
We knew the way to the kitchen porch where the carrots and turnips were. And when we were lucky, if you worked in the kitchen, you'd go hide a box of apples or oranges so you could get it at night. And we'd call all the boys, say, here's a couple apples. And we'd take the orange peel, group of us. We'd eat our orange. Then we'd all split the orange peel and eat the white part first, and then eat the orange after. And it tasted horrible, but at least you got something in your stomach.
When I listen to that video, I think about hearing about children being so hungry that they had to steal food. And I know we're told stealing is bad, but what happens when people don't have enough food? I think then it's something, I would call that something different. I would call that trying to survive or survival. This picture here shows some what the dining halls in residential schools look like. I'm going to play this. I'm going to turn down the volume of it so that I can take questions if people have questions. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to make this work the way that I want it to work, because I can't see anything like I usually can. Maybe I'll stop this share so that I can see people there. And is there somebody here who's going to be relaying questions to me?
Yeah, I can do that, Carey. So we actually have a Q&A link that was sent out with the flyer that people can submit questions to. I mean, if people want to use Zoom and put up their hand, I mean, we can allow them to ask a question that way as well. But we thought it would be easier for people to submit questions in advance. But I'm just looking right now. You know, after your powerful words, I think a lot of people are just speechless right now and don't have a lot of questions to ask. But we've got about 5 minutes or so to ask some questions of Carrie if people have some questions to pose. So.
Maybe while we're waiting for that, I'll go back to my the screen share so you can see sorry, you can see the animation of the witness blanket that I had planned to play over this. And Tobias, if examples come up, please please send them through to just disrupt me and I can listen to them that way. Okay.
Sure. There's a question coming through in the chat. It says, were all churches involved in the creation of the witness blanket?
Not every single church was. I think in the end we got something from each of the different denominations that ran residential schools. But for instance, the United Church was quite forthcoming. They were eager to participate. And when it came to the Catholic Church, they were a little bit more hesitant. I think that they were concerned about liability.
There's another question in the chat here, just talking about the word blanket. What's the significance of the word blanket in the title?
Oh, that's a great question. The significance of the word blanket is when you look at the whole structure of it, how it's put together is there's these pieces of wood that have cables that run between them. I wanted to make this, I knew I was making it out of solid objects, but I wanted to make it have some of the features of a blanket. So there's the way the wood is arranged is in stitching patterns. The way things like this star pattern are modeled after quilts. And the reason I chose blanket is because blankets have such significance in so many cultures. And in all of them, blankets are about comfort and protection. So in my Kwakwaka'wakw culture, we wear blankets that have symbols on them that tell people the history of our family. In my Coast Salish culture, we wrap people in blankets to honor them or uplift them. And we wrap babies in blankets when they're born. So I thought that when we're dealing with such difficult history, making something in the form of a blanket, even if it's not actually a blanket, would be a very good symbol or metaphor for what I want this artwork to do.
Okay, thanks for that. We got time maybe for like one or two more questions. One in the Q&A. Were students at residential schools, were they forced to smile in photos? Because there were some photos that included children.
Yeah, I've been working on a project with the Canadian Museum for Human Rights where we've been going through the archives of the photos. And there's a striking similarity in the way that photos were taken. And there's researchers who are kind of uncovering that very much like a photo day for students now, everybody would be asked to get dressed up in a particular way and they would keep taking the picture until everybody smiled. And so on the witness blanket, actually, there's one piece on there where there's a whole group of people smiling, and there's one boy who's sort of off to the side and he's looking down and he's looking quite upset. And so I have the picture of everybody, but I also have that little section of him where you could see that he's really not very happy.
Okay, and there was a question about the witness blanket ever coming to Kelowna. I mean, we know that the replica right now is in the Kelowna Art Gallery, but the real thing that lives somewhere, right? Does it get to travel still?
It's going to have very, very limited travel. Right now, the original blanket is at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights in Winnipeg, and is undergoing some conservation work, and it will be staying there for the most part, except for when they're setting up a new gallery, which I think at that point is going to a museum in Quebec. So that's why we made this replica. And we're actually making a second replica that's going to be traveling, and they're both going to be traveling around this and other countries until at least the end of 2025. So 3 more years of the replicas traveling.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us, everyone. Thanks to Carey for sharing his powerful story. Lots of powerful images. You know, we love these opportunities to learn, and you know, we're excited to hear about all the different stories throughout the day today as part of our Harmony Day. So there is a link if you have other questions for Carey. He put it in the chat there. Yeah, once again, thank you very much on behalf of School District 23, Central Okanagan Public Schools. We appreciate your time and efforts to join us. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it.